Welcome to Kelleys Island and part 2 of our walking tour of historic sites, businesses, and houses. As you know, we are an island located about 4.5 miles from the mainland in Lake Erie. The Kelleys Island Ferry serves the island, landing at Seaway Marina, and the Jet Express lands at the downtown dock. Whether you came by way of ferry or the jet, most people who don't bring their cars over will rent a golf cart. This is one of the best ways to tour the entire island. But if you're just exploring our downtown area, this part of the tour gives you a history of the businesses and houses located downtown, and then takes you on a short and pleasant walk a little way down Division Street, ending at the History Museum of the Kelleys Island Historical Association. When viewing this slideshow, just hit the pause button to read about whichever location you're standing in front of. Please remember, though, while businesses welcome you, all those houses are private and not open to the public. We know it's tempting, but please do not bother the owners or trespass on their property. Our thanks to Leslie Karenko, island historian and author, for putting this tour together. We start our tour right downtown with the Island Market, site number 19. You may be surprised to know that the Island Market was once part of the store on the corner, also known as the Lodge. It dates back to the 1860s. Before the building was split apart, the rear section was used as a library, called the Reading Room, a boot and shoe shop, and later a butcher shop. Henry Trishman supplied his store with beef and hogs that he kept in a stockyard near Woodford and Monaghan Roads. He ran the shop until 1915. Frank and Laura Jean Pohorence took over the store in 1946, renaming it the Island Market. In 1983, Rob and Kim Watkins bought the business and continue to run it today. Step inside for a step back into the past. Next door is Elfer's store, site number 20. This was Fred Elfer's new store. The left side of the building was built in 1890 and the right side in 1893. Take a minute to look at the pressed tin ceiling and walls and the rolling ladder. Tucked inside the center wall on the left side is a connecting door. The store boasted many of the newest innovations, such as a freight elevator, ceiling fans, and a coffee roaster, all powered by an arc lighting system. It was the first electric light system in Erie County and the only one on the island. After Fred died in 1923, there were several short-term owners. When Frank Pohorence purchased the building, he used it for storage for the Island Market next door. Our next stop is just past the miniature golf course. It is site number 21, the Kelly family's first house. Datus Kelly built a log house on this site in the fall of 1836. That would be the left side of the building. The following spring, he built the frame part on the right side. That first winter, they had boards for a door and no furniture, except what they could borrow from the boarding house. Once the family home was built overlooking the lake, this house became the island's first store and a temporary school, mostly for the Kelly children. Note the unusual small window near the top left side where the two parts of the houses meet. This is the oldest house on the island. Across the street is site number 22, the general store. The store was built in 1885 on part of the Island House Hotel lot. Fred Elfers, the first manager, had moved his store closer to town. He offered a complete line of groceries, dry goods, and housewares on the first floor, and a meeting hall for the Maccabees on the second floor. Elfers added a small annex to the store's south wall, that would be the right side, and since he was the new postmaster, moved the post office from the lodge. 2 years later, he built a larger store across the street. William Berger took over this store for 30 years, converting the old post office annex to his undertaker's business. In 1915, the annex once again became the island's post office. At one time, there was a small restaurant in the building. Site number 23, that beautiful big stone building, is historic Kelleys Hall. It was built in 1861 by Datus and Sarah Kelly as a gift to their little island community. It was dedicated on their 50th wedding anniversary in October. Be sure to read the dedication plaque on the right front of the building. They wrote, "The conditions of this gift and conveyance are that the said building shall be devoted to the purpose of disseminating useful knowledge in the shape of lectures, preaching, exhibitions, and for social enjoyment, and shall be an open platform for all respectable persons to promulgate their sentiment and convictions of truth, free and unmolested." For 18 years, a weekly winter gathering was held here, and sections of the handwritten Islander newspaper were read and debated. This building was the center of the community as people gathered to debate, hear the newspaper read, and for parties, dances, plays, church services, funerals, and weddings. Site number 24. Not actually a site, but take a minute to look down Division Street towards the lake. Look at the photo. This is what it looked like in the old days. You can see horse-drawn carriages, on the left, competing with the new automobile, on the right. The foyer of Kelleys Hall was added in 1901, and the steamboat dock looks a lot different today. Just to the left of Kelleys Hall are our next two stops. Site number 25, the Island Jail. It had long been lamented that there was no lockup on the island. The increase in transient workers at the quarry and the increasing popularity of the island created a problem for the peaceful islanders. The contract was awarded to island stonemason Nicholas Smith. Built in 1886 for $1,326, it was constructed of island stone and had iron cages, or cells, that were considered fireproof. The jail cells were built by the Van Dorn Ironworks Company of Cleveland. The building has just 2 rooms. The front room is used by police officers for dispatch, and the rear is now used for storage as the cells no longer meet the requirements for holding prisoners. The jail did not get electricity until August 1889, when the village council recommended the purchase of 1 incandescent light 63 candle power for the jail, which was just built. To the left of that is our water department. That's site number 26. It was not until 1937 that municipal water became available on the island. The plant was a simple pump station built by the WPA under the New Deal. The project reached 30 homes, the school, a church, and the quarry, and involved over 2,800 linear feet of 6-inch water line, 7 hydrants, a chlorination system, and the water tower you see today, located just a little further down Division Street. Because there was so much bedrock, 4,900 pounds of dynamite were used in the laying of the water lines. Prior to this, water was hauled from the lake, and windmills were a very common sight. The original plant was located on the shoreline just east of the casino. The new building is closest to Division Street and was built in 1974. It used sand filters. It was expanded in 1989 and replaced entirely in 2001. Just to the left of the parking lot is site number 27, the Dwelly House. This house was originally built by Jerry Dean on a half-acre of land purchased in 1866 from Alfred S. Kelly. The Dean family was related by marriage to Sarah Kelly. Dean worked as a clerk on the steamboat, the Island Queen, and later at the lodge. He was associated with the Kelleys Island Wine Company. He sold the house in 1880 to Hubbard and Lena Dwelly. The house was enlarged several times to accommodate boarders, and 1 wing was added for a doctor's office. At the death of Jean Dwelly, the village took possession of the property. To this day, it is called the Dwelly House. In 2009, the structure was extensively remodeled, and several major structural issues were resolved. Today, the building serves as housing for our police officers. Next to that is Site 28, the doctor's house. Dr. Snyder purchased this lot in 1887, intending to build a house and set up practice here. A year later, Edward Collins, a retired freighter captain, built a house on this site. Around 1922, Fred Reinheimer, who owned the general store, bought the house. After Frank's death, his widow sold the house to the village around 1930 to be used as a house for island doctors. The offer of free housing was a great attraction, and the Kelleys Island Lime and Transport Company shared the cost of the physician's services with the village. At one time, there was a large barn in the rear yard. Next door is site number 29, Luetjen's house. By 1874, there was already a house on this site, although it is unclear who the owner or builder was. In 1896, records show that Christopher Luetjens, a quarry worker and grape grower, owned the house. It appears that at some point, the Kelleys Island Lime and Transport Company purchased the property for quarry housing. When the quarry closed, the company transferred ownership of almost all of their holdings to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, which in turn sold the house to Alvis and Ada Vest in 1963. Okay, we're back on the other side of the street, which has the sidewalk. We're going to be stopping at site number 30, Henry Trishman's house. Built in 1875, this large Italianate-styled house was once part of a working farm. Henry was one of two butchers on the island. His shop was located in what is now the Island Market. He owned property on Monaghan Road and also grew grapes. Henry's granddaughter, Virginia D. Thompson, wrote that the house had 7 bedrooms, a privy, a chicken house and yard, a dog house one could walk into, because Henry raised Dalmatians as coach dogs, a barn for equipment, a barn for animals, a carriage house with wonderful buggies and sleighs, a garden house covered with climbing roses, a pigsty, and a vegetable garden, not to mention lots of flowers. For decades, this has been known as the Island House Restaurant. Next door to that is site number 31, the South Side School. This lovely stone building was built in 1853 and served as the first permanent school. It was known as School District Number 1. There were actually 4 on the island. The first floor housed the lower grades, and the upper floor had classrooms for grades 7 and 8. The school closed in 1901 when the much larger Esty School opened. Esty School is located just a bit further down Division Street. Between 1950 and 1985, Iola Reedy lived here and ran the island's public library from her house. People would pick up and return their books from the top of the washer in the back room. The library moved to the basement of Esty School sometime later. Recently, new doors and windows were installed. If you could peek inside, you would see that the stairs are well worn and the doors and windows are built into thick stone walls. Okay, now we look across the street. See those 2 stone houses? Site number 32 is the first one. It's the William Schlusselman house. While several houses were built of island limestone, this is one of just 3 homes built of glacial erratic, those beautiful round stones that washed out of the glaciers, although island limestone was used to trim out the windows and such. Godfrey Shook built this house in 1937 for William Schlusselman, who was the son of fishing boss Henry Schlusselman and his wife Bertha. After returning to the island in the 1930s, Henry opened a barber shop on the steamboat dock. His wife, called Becky, had a small dry goods shop in the basement of the house between 1940 and 1949. The Schlusselman men have a long history connected to the lake and were mail carriers for many years, manning the ironclad mailboat and carrying the mail to Sandusky during the winter. Next door to that is site number 33, Godfrey Shook's house. Godfrey Shook trained as a stonemason in Germany before arriving on the island in 1918. His work included outbuildings at Kelleys Mansion, the War Memorial in the downtown park, and 5 lovely island homes. His own home was built in 1936. Shook received his plot of land in return for building the Schlusselman house next door. Both houses were built entirely from local stone. There are just 3 houses on the island built with glacial erratics. During his 45-year career, Shook built 2 churches, one in Marblehead and one in Detroit, and constructed quite a few chimneys and fireplaces on the island. Okay, we're back on the west side of Division Street again to see site number 34, Dan McGettigan's house. This property was once part of George Kelly's holdings. Dan was born on the island in 1851, and when he was old enough, he worked with his brothers as a fisherman. He remained a bachelor until 1898, when he married. In 1902, he bought this property, and he and his wife Sarah built this house. At one time, it had a large barn in the backyard. As you can see, it has been substantially remodeled on the outside. Next door to it is site number 35, John Hughes' house. This house was built around 1873 by William Moots, likely for one of his children. The lot was also part of George Kelly's holdings. In 1905, John and Laura Hughes bought the house. John was already managing a bar called Hughes Buffet, which was located in George Shart's new island house at the Corners. The old one burned in 1877. When that building burned, John went to work in the quarry's cooper shop. His daughter, Mary Augusta, married Oscar McKillips, and they lived here with her father for many years. Next door is site number 36, a former quarry house. This house, built around 1900 at the height of the quarry expansion, once stood on the south side of Bookerman Road. It was owned by the Kelleys Island Lime and Transport Company and housed quarry workers for the West Side facilities. When a fire burned a nearby store on Christmas Day in 1919, the owner, Frank Reinheimer, used this house, which was located nearby, as his temporary store. He carried a limited line of dry goods and staples. Surprisingly, the house was moved to its present location for Sam Myers around 1943. It was placed on the foundation of an older house that was once owned by Wilson and Sarah Dean Hamilton. Next door is site 37. This was a gas station. The surprising little house with its white picket fence and cottage look was once a gas station. Records show that the original lot was quite large, and there was already a house nearby. But this is where he built his gas station, and he chose a good spot right on Division Street. Next, you come to what appears to be an empty lot. It is, but this was site number 38, the Congregational Church. This was once the site of the Union Evangelical Church, which in 1868 became the first Congregational Church. This church was dedicated in November 1877. It was called the Church That Was Built with the Needle and Thread. After meeting in Kelleys Hall for years, 2 sewing societies began raising funds for a new building by making clothing and selling the ready-made items. The lot was donated by Lucy F. Murray. This was the 4th of 5 church buildings dedicated on the island. The wood church was torn down in 1934. Next door to that is site number 39, Dr. Phan's house. Dr. George C. Phan was elected the first mayor of Kelleys Island after it became a village in 1887. This house was built by Dr. Phan in 1892. The doctor had a separate entrance, the door on the right, to his offices. He was the island's most prominent physician. He died in 1894 at the young age of 42, leaving the house to his second wife, Clara. It was rented out for several years. In 1914, Clara rented it to January Coucher, who built Coucher's Saloon on the steamboat dock. Coucher served 3 terms on council. In 1924, Joe Matzo bought the property, renting it to various doctors over the years. 1 year after purchasing the lodge, Russell and Beatrice Matzo moved into the house and raised their family. Right across the street is a very large church. That is site number 40, now the Zion Church. Built in 1893, this was the German Evangelical Church, although English services began in 1910. The congregation began meeting in a small house located just to the north on Division Street. The parsonage next door, to the right, was built in 1873. When the German Reformed and the Congregational churches discontinued services, this church adopted a more ecumenical stance and became known as the Community Brethren Church in Christ, and later joined the Methodist denomination. This church and St. Michael's, further down Chapel Street, are the only two active churches on the island. People often wonder about the spelling of Chapel Street. Chapel is the maiden name of Mehetabel Titus. While this section of road has the island's only two active churches on it, it was never intended to be called Chapel Street. Next door is site number 41, Little Beatty's Church. This small house was once the meeting place for the German Evangelical Church. The congregation began as informal gatherings in 1854, formalized under the direction of Louis Beatty and Theodore Suhr. The little church building was abandoned when the congregation moved to the much larger new church next door in 1893. The house was purchased by Clayton Hughes in 1927. Changes included adding a basement and furnace, extending the north wall, and adding a room on the east wall of the kitchen. Site number 42, Edward Bauman's house. Ed Bauman purchased this land from William and Ann Twidney and built his house in 1885. Unfortunately, Bauman died of tuberculosis soon after the house was completed. A short time later, a blacksmith shop was erected on the property. It was considered the village smithy and was operated by several different smiths. The most well-known was Herbert Pringnitz. Various members of the Bauman family have lived here over the years. A porch was built around 1928, but removed and replaced in 1978. That decorative millwork trim that you see, it was scavenged from the James Hamilton house overlooking the North Bay when it was demolished. The small log cabin to the rear of the house may look old, but it isn't. Next door is site number 43, Elfer's first store. Frederick Elfers had this store built in 1876. He offered merchandise in competition with the lodge downtown. Free smokers to attract customers, and supposedly when the lodge got too cold for comfort, the men got their cigars and tobacco at the lodge, then went down to Elfer's store to smoke. Other reports indicated that the men brought their tobacco and cigars at Elfer's store, but then took them to the lodge to smoke. Elfer's efforts were so successful, he later moved downtown, opening first one and then another larger store. In 1927, George Gerlach rebuilt the old store for use as his workshop, using lumber he salvaged from the Incubator, a West Side Quarry housing unit. Site number 44, the Kelleys Island History Museum. While not an historic building, it is the home of the island's most unique history, ranging from its quarries to its wineries, home life to farm life, fishing, churches and schools, and our unique connection to Lake Erie and its boats, all have their history in the care of the Kelleys Island Historical Association. The association was formed in 1980, motivated by the need to preserve the stone church, which had fallen into disrepair and neglect. Along with the church came the parsonage next door. Over the years, the association has worked to strengthen and repair the church floor, replace the windows, install heat and air conditioning, and improve drainage around the building, while protecting the church's original building. The museum is open from late May to late September and welcomes over 2,000 guests each year. Site number 45, the Old Stone Church. By 1865, the German Reformed Church was the second formal congregation to be established on the island after St. Michael's Catholic Church. The church was built in 1866 using island stone from across the street. The last regular services were held in 1917, and one last service was held in 1942 for its founder, William Berger. The Ladies' Aid Society maintained the church until the mid-1950s. In 1977, the property was leased to the Kelleys Island Historical Association and then formally deeded to them in 1981. Until the new museum opened in 2010, the small church served as both a museum and gift shop. The church is open during museum hours, so visitors can appreciate its simple beauty. Be sure to check out the stove in the middle of the room. It's the frost killer. Next door to the church is site number 46, the church parsonage. The congregation of the German Reformed Church built a parsonage on land purchased for $51 from Mrs. Ann Twidney on August 8, 1888. By 1915, the island's population and the congregation had dwindled and could no longer support a resident minister. The church trustees rented the house to the Betzenheimer family. Florence Betzenheimer McKillips carried on her mother Emma's role in caring for both the church and the parsonage, even after both buildings became part of the Kelleys Island Historical Association in the 1980s. The association granted Mrs. McKillips use of the house until her death in 2013 at the age of 92. It has no running water, but is serviced by the hand pump in the kitchen, pulling water from a cistern under the house. Because there is no indoor plumbing, check out the outhouse in the backyard. This ends part 2 of the walking tour of Kelleys Island. This is not to say there isn't more to see, because there certainly is. If you continue down Division Street, you'll see the ruins of the Monarch or Sweet Valley Wine Company. They're across from the cemetery. The cemetery dates back to 1854. A bit further down is the state park and the spectacular glacial grooves. Just past that are some really great hiking trails in what was the North Side Quarry. If you want more information on the history of the island, we recommend visiting the Kelleys Island History Museum. Their website is www.kelleysislandhistorical.org, and on Facebook they are the Kelleys Island History Museum. 6 books about the extraordinary history of Kelleys Island, written by Leslie Karenko, island historian, can be found at her website, which is www.kelleysislandstory.com. We hope you've enjoyed part 2 of the walking tour, and we look forward to meeting you.